All right, there we go. Like we're live for the first A session. That is Ask Me Anything of 2020, and I've already got a lot of questions. That's why I'm starting a little bit early. It's 11:58 here, and I was supposed to start at noon, but I see all questions, so I thought I would jump into them right away. So Bombhead asks, where is the line between justice and forgiveness? There isn't a line between justice and forgiveness. This is one of those sort of questions where you're asking a overly broad, big picture thing, unless you're indexing it to somebody's ideas or sort of conceptions coming from somewhere. It's not answerable because there isn't justice in the abstract as we can say very much about. There's justice is understood through particular theories. Some of them are better perspectives than others, and likewise forgiveness. There's a long history of literature about this going all the way back prior to Christian appropriation of Greek philosophy and well into Aristotle, for example. His discussions of forgiveness. So, if in order to answer a question like that, I think you probably want to read around in the literature, and a quick Google search will find you all sorts of stuff about forgiveness that might be quite interesting. Another similar question, Sean Hamill, in what ways, if any, is the Jew reading of the Old Testament Tanakh superior to an average Christian one? In ways is the average Christian read superior, if any? No such thing as the Jewish reading or an average Christian reading. That's sort of nonsensical non-starters. You can talk about a wide range of readings within what we nowadays recognize as atheism, whether we're talking about, the radical movement that leads, through the Pharisees into present-day Judaism, or whether we want to bring in Hasidic reading. That's a reaction against some of the overly rabbinical stuff, whether we want to talk about Reform and Reconstructionist readings. There is no single Jewish reading, and the more that we read around, the more we discover that. I was thinking earlier today too about it was earlier today and earlier yesterday about how people talk about the Bible as a book, and what a mistake that is, because it's the books, Biblia, right? And when you're, I was talking with a friend of mine about biblical literature the other day, and we're talking the wisdom literature, which both have an interest in, and how different that's from, say, the genocidal, book of Joshua, things, along these lines. It's not as there's just one single text that you read. It's all these texts that are brought together. I wouldn't even know what the average Christian reading is. What Christian would you be referring to? Like an American evangelical who has a Bible app and then reads passages each day and maybe goes to the Bible study? Are you talking about a Catholic? Are you talking about an Eastern Orthodox person? This isn't an answerable question. Here's one that is answerable. Zach, how are you doing today, Dr. Sadler? I'm doing okay. I have been taking it relatively easy over the last few days. I did a lot more hanging out. My wife and I have been doing things like playing chess and playing cards, and she's been doing a really great cooking over the last days. I'm about to do some other stuff fairly soon. I see somebody complaining choppy and static audio is awful. Audio is ugh. Man, Chad just really complain a lot. I don't know what to tell you about the problem with the audio. It's whiz, right? I've got the tech that I have. The internet isn't working great. I live in an apartment. We have one big internet feed. I don't control all of these sorts of things. I can check the audio. The audio is fine on my end. Got my mic here, and I've got, I've already tapped like the here. Be a problem with the internet? I don't know. The things that people worry about. I have control over these things. All right, back to stuff. So, useless project said in your last Q&A, Albert Camus has some great ideas, but you disagree with them. Could you go into some details on where you disagree with him on his philosophy of the absurd? Yeah, I mean, I think he closes off transcendence in ways similar to Nietzsche that I just think it's a choice on his part. Doesn't have to be so. I had some of his readings of people. He's a pretty good reader of other philosophers, but he's going to get things off. I don't think he takes Kierkegaard and Shestov as seriously as he does as he could. I think that when it comes to Kafka, it's a mistake to say the Castle is sort of like the culmination of Kafka's work. But he's got interesting readings and reasons for why he's putting forth positions that he does, right? Matthew Hopkins says, Happy New Year. I've been working through Descartes a lot recently. I was hoping you could say a few words on wax, image, imitation, too. Is he making a case for the organizing capacity of the mind faced with raw substance, material information coming from the outside world, or more to it? Well, there's a couple things going on there. He's like thinking about the nature of physical substance, and that some of the properties of it are what Locke is going to later on call secondary properties, things that are essentially in our minds, the way we interpret the thing rather than the way the thing is in itself. At bottom, what extended substance is extension, and it's mathematizable, and it can be understood in a variety of ways that Descartes thinks modern science can get at. So that's one thing going on there. The other thing that's important in it is saying, listen, mind has different activities. I mean, if you look at the cogito that's talked about before that, and he says, well, what is the thinks? And he enumerates all these different modes of thinking. That's a really important spot in meditation too, that a lot of people blow past, and they're like, well, of course, the thing that doubts and that blah, 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 right? No, each one of those is a mode of thinking for Descartes, really quite important. And what is it that grasps what's going on there with the substance of the wax? Well, that's not senses themselves, right? Or the imagination. It's rather the intellect. But what grasps all these other properties, the senses? So it's showing us that our minds can be applied at the same time in a variety of different ways to the same object. Also, I'll tell you another thing about Descartes. So emotions are modes of thought, Descartes, right? Because what else could they be? Right? And so we feel towards something, like let's say we have an aesthetic response to the piece of wax, like it could be like nostalgia about the time they melted wax together with our beloved family, making seals for Christmas or something like that. That would be yet another mode of apprehending the object, the emotions that are involved there, passions for Descartes. So there's a lot of things you can read into it. The more that you read across Descartes, more you're going to discover how much other stuff is going on, right? So, all right, I see some people still complaining about audio. Nothing to do about it, If it's really bothering you, then jump off, right? I control it, so I've done everything I do on my end. All right, let's see here. Dylan says, what are your thoughts on Buddhism? How compatible is it with other philosophies, Stoicism? What Buddhism? Is there a Buddhism? Because if you read textbooks, if you actually go around and spend time with people who are Buddhists, you're going to find a very significant variance between, say, Theravada monks in Sri Lanka and Pure Land Buddhists practicing in Japan, or like my family does in Chicago, or Zen Buddhists, or sort of people doing amalgams things in the present, like all the different other new types of Buddhism that emerged in the 20th century. So, what do I think? I think of that. Buddhism is quite interesting. I think it's a vast philosophical and religious tradition that goes back millennia, that we should be very, very careful about generalizing too much about Buddhism as such. And we have to be very, we have to think of what Buddhisms are we talking about. I mean, Pure Land Buddhism is one of the most widespread versions, but I don't see a lot of people who talk about Buddhism actually think about Pure Land Buddhism and the whole idea of the Pure Land and what it means. But people who take Buddhism seriously know all about that sort of thing. Is it compatible with other philosophies? It depends on what you mean by compatible. Anything is compatible with anything else if you want to fudge them or kind of smush them together. But there are places where you just have to pick and choose, right? Where you're going to have to say, I like this, but I don't like that. And so, Stoicism says there is an actual self. Buddhism says there isn't. They're not totally incompatible, because the self of Stoicism is not just this root part thing, whatever that happens to be. Epictetus says it's a system of nomine, not phenomena, appearances, impressions. So, yeah. I think you can ask about what it's connected to in other ways. But so let's move on to the next one. Actually, I just got a text. All right. So Andrew says, people who haven't developed emotionally and wisely as grown up and experiences do have on us. Do you think there's a danger of following certain philosophies? People who haven't did emotionally, I imagine that has to do with so people who are young, people who haven't, people who have experienced trauma and are trying to make sense of things. Is there a danger of following certain philosophies? Yeah, and following there would be like unquestioningly jumping off and embracing it the way that people take on self-help programs or diets or other things like that. And that would be, kind of foolish. There's no philosophy that you can't misunderstand and use. So are there some that you should avoid? I guess you should say it's not so much that you avoid philosophies. It's that you should avoid taking on ways of making sense of them. You have to approach them in light, right? And so it may be useful to embrace what we call the ethical, insight, which goes all the way back to Plato's Academy when it took its skeptical turn, and it's been talked about recently by philosophers like Odo Makar, German philosopher in the 20th century. The way to address a philosophy that's totalizing, that is, you could say, taking up too much of your life space, is to bring in another philosophy and have sort of balance each other out. William James, talked about that as a kind of pluralism. So I think that would be a way to do it. All right. Well, people keep talking about the audio issue. There's not really anything I can do about that. I mean, we can do this. There's no repeat because I'd have to set up an entirely new thing for it. But I don't know what to tell you. The microphone I see working. So, all right, let's take the next one. Here we go. Jeff says, how much time do you think non-specialists should spend on philosophy? If on skills and obligations on other fields and deep study of philosophy takes time, those what to do? Well, you devote the time that you've got. You can. This is about how you devote your time that you have. You can use available moments. My wife and I were just talking about this today. In the downtime that you have, 5 minutes here, 20 minutes there, you could watch TV or watch a video or get involved in Twitter dispute, or you could read philosophy. There's only so many hours in the day. I guess any consolation, and those of us who do philosophy more or less full time, we don't have enough time to do everything that we want to do. I don't know any of my peers who actually have enough time themselves. So, yeah, I don't know what to say about that. Let's see. What else do we have? We have a lot of questions here. Mason asks, what are some key things to keep in mind when approaching work and thought of Hegel? You're going to have to read and reread and read. There is no mastering Hegel. There is no shortcut to studying Hegel. This is all sort of negative stuff, right? I'm saying, but I think it could be useful because I love people talking as if Hegel is something that you just take on and master. I mean, you can't even do that. I answered a Quora question a while back. Somebody asked, how do you master Stoicism? And I was like, you don't. That's not the right way to go about it. You acknowledge that you are now studying something that covers a lot of things, and you have to do a lot of work to understand. And each time that you put it in, it's kind of an iterative process. You get to a certain plateau, and now you see a bit further. That's even more so with Hegel. I would say, and this is a bit of advice that I often give, don't try to start out with a phenomenology. I know a lot of people love to talk about the phenomenology, but it's sort of like Marx's Kapital. People brag about having read it and made sense of it. It's a very, very difficult work, and you're better off starting something a little bit easier to make sense of. Like, I always recommend Hegel's lectures on the philosophy of history, his lectures on the history of philosophy as good starting places. Oh, that actually answers Isaac Zurich, his question about prerequisites before trying to read Hegel. I don't think you have to have prerequisites before trying to read Hegel, but you don't want to start out reading the phenomenology, let alone science of logic, right? I mean, you could actually, if you want to have a book that's one of the not lectures, like published books out with philosophy of right wouldn't be bad. It still is a tough book, but it could be better. All right, Lokesh says, what's your take on Charles Sanders Peirce's Pragmatism? Peirce is a very interesting author. He is one of the first people to start writing and identifying pragmatism as such, and then William James, as many of you know, jumps in and takes over the word, and then Peirce changes his term to pragmatism and says, I'm making words so ugly so nobody like James will come along and take it over from me. So yeah. Peirce is a really, really interesting figure, and I think that he's well worth studying. He doesn't get studied an awful lot, and if you're interested in American pragmatism, the key figures are Peirce, James, and then usually they talk about Dewey. You should probably talk about Royce along the way, and it would hurt to study George Santayana as well. So, all right, Mark says, are there any questions, surprises that have never been asked in an AMA? I think I get a lot more questions about philosophy, and I mean in a very broad sense, where it bleeds over into religion and also some like we can call pop psychology stuff. I get asked a lot more about that than I do things having to do with like matters that I've discussed in my Sadler stories videos or my personal videos. And I guess I'm kind of surprised people don't ask more about those sorts of things. I mean, I see in here people asking about religion and all of that. That seems to be the main thing people are interested. So yeah, I guess that would be my answer there. Colum asks, have I ever heard of the Kyoto School of Philosophy? If so, do you have any thoughts on the subject? Yeah, I've heard of the Kyoto School. I learned about them back in grad school. I haven't read any of them, so I don't have any thoughts on the subject. Stephen, hi, Dr. Sadler. As a Christian, do you ever struggle with your faith? If so, how do you approach the struggle? I think this struggle is necessary for cultivating faith itself. I think you've got to be very careful, just like when I was talking about the generic Christian or Jewish read on scripture, not to try to take what person and experiences or finds word for them and extrapolate it out to everybody. Yeah, of course. I think anybody thinker and who is religious in any sense and going to struggle with their religious faith. And if they don't, that's probably because they haven't very much. Right? It necessary. I mean, I've known people who seem to have a perfectly good faith life without having to go through thinking about philosophical issues. Augustine actually talked about that. Old women who have never read anything because they're illiterate and they understand faith, hope, and charity better than theologians do because they practice it. So is it necessary to have that? I don't think so. How do you approach struggles? It depends on the struggle. There's not like there's a recipe. I mean, I think the more that you read and arm yourself with things that you can mull over and connect off with other people who have run into similar issues or maybe haven't. Maybe you ask them and they have. That's probably helpful, right? So, all right, JDD, what bands or albums immediately come to mind that you would consider existential? Been listening to Everywhere at the End of Time, and I mean it's a tough listen. Like if Neil Chorin had a soundtrack, totally depends on what kind of existentialist we're thinking about. Existentialism is not just the Frenchies and the add with Nietzsche, Dostoevsky, Kierkegaard, and Heidegger. Add there's a whole bunch of existential thinkers, and I mean I don't know that there's any particular bands or albums that I say are particularly existential, except in that they talk about life issues. Think about, for example, Witchfinder General and their song "Love on Smack," right, which is essentially about falling in love with a prostitute in the early 80s or maybe 70s and trying to forge a life and hurting on him. Existential? I guess it is. What are you going to what do you call existential? I mean, there's that Rush song, right? Free Will, which is definitely, saying interesting existential things about choice and all that. But I don't know that we have to read these things back inward in there. All right, let's see here. Just skip down a bit. Dale asks, have I read works of Hermann Hesse? What's my opinion of him? I read Siddhartha. I've read a few other things here and there. What I've read of Hesse has not been sufficiently compelling to me to go read more Hesse. I understand that people think he's a really great author. It's different tastes for different people. I don't really get into so much. Venor, do I have any recommendations for post-human philosophy readings? Well, I don't think I'm human, so and I don't think really too many of the other people that I read are post-human, so I don't really have any recommendations for that. Somebody asked, will you be doing a series on Aristotle's Metaphysics? I already did it on Aristotle's Metaphysics. Just on one, though. I mean, it's easy enough to search in the channel and find anything that you want to find. Guardian dude says, what advice would you give someone in their mid-30s who wants to re-engage in faith after being more or less lackadaisical in religious practice? I would say reading literature is going to be a big part. Scriptures, find the ones that you want to read. Don't force yourself to stuff that you find mind-numbingly boring, like these endless lists of where military forces came from the various tribes of Israel and some of the historical works. If you're interested in philosophy, the wisdom literature, Ecclesiastes and Job, and the Psalms are actually considered wisdom literature as well, but Proverbs, Book of Wisdom of Ben Sirach, all those sorts of things. And then you want to read other thinkers who have something to say. So it could be contemporary figures, it could be 20th century thinkers like Gabriel Marcel, who's definitely a person attuned to the difficulties of believing and action. Could be, reading Augustine's Confessions. Could be, reading cool stuff, Clement of Alexandria's, Stromata's, other church fathers. You just want to read some stuff, and then connect with the people who are similarly interested, and worry less about their what their bona fides are, or you're getting the best version of it, and start exploring and connect it to your life and say, all right. Nausea says, what are some good primers to get into German idealism? I don't know. I don't read a lot of second literature, and I don't read primers. So I don't spend a lot of time on those, like introduction to such and such and such. We all have limited time, and I'm not a good person to ask about that. So, all right. Let's see here. Bunch of stuff about audio. Barklord, are you familiar with John Scotus Erigina's work? I am indeed familiar with John Scotus Erigina's work. Kaido Love, what would you recommend reading by Shestov after All Things Are Possible? He's got a good book on Dostoevsky and Nietzsche. All of this, by the way, you can available for free online. Athens and Jerusalem is considered by a lot of people to be his best work. That's actually part of the Christian philosophy debates. He got involved in those in the mid-30s with a set of articles in the Revue de Metaphysique et Morale. In Job's Balances is good. There's all sorts. You just type in Lev Shov text, it'll take you to that Angel Fire site, which has his available for free, and you kind of be around in there, All right, Karen, what do you think of the view the Austrian School of Economics is more of a philosophy and a scientific analysis of political economy, Well, I think that economics is really all that scientific to begin with. It's not scientific in the way that like the natural sciences are scientific. It's certainly a social science. And is there any school in economics or sociology or psychology that does not have philosophical commitments? Often quite bad ones, unthought out ones. I don't think so. So why they be different than anybody else? Yeah, that's what I would say. All right. Thomas asks, who would you say are some more accessible philosophers? I'm really interested in Bataille, Nietzsche, Jung, that they seem quite challenging and complex. Well, I don't know what you're going to do then, because if you want to study them, there's no ground studying them. Oh yeah, Bataille is tricky, Nietzsche's tricky. Jung, I guess you could call him a philosopher if you want to. I mean, I'm not sure why if you're that interested in Bataille, you'd be that interested in Jung, but different people get into things. But when you're asking about like simpler or more accessible philosophers, I don't know. I mean, I think it's a very relative term. I'm often surprised by what people that I run into say easy for them to read and what's hard for them to read. It's not there's a universal scale or something that we can easily go along with. So Eric's friends and I are reading Duty of Genius, the Wittgenstein bio, alongside the Tractatus. Anything to be aware of that might prevent misunderstanding? Yeah, and the Tractatus is a very limited piece, and Wittgenstein essentially repudiates it later on. He was one of the people who was sort of like in the right place at the right time when philosophy had somewhat impoverished itself. Ray Monk is a good biographer. I don't think that there's anything that you have to worry about that. I'm actually connected with him on Twitter, and he seems to be a genuinely good person. Wittgenstein is in many respects, his work is sort of like a whole series of interesting missed occasions. And so, it's kind of cool that you're reading the Tractatus. Don't expect to get that much of it, I mean, like the philosophical innovations and uncertainty remarks on the foundations of mathematics. There's interesting stuff there, but there's not that much to get out of it, I would say. So, all right. Let's see here. James, what are your thoughts on ethical intuitionism? I understand intuitions are unavoidable in philosophy. I'm skeptical of it as a moral theory. We have theories to do better intuitions. So I think you may have misread. If you're talking about W. Ross does not think that everything just boils down to intuitions. And so either you've read like what Ross has to say about this, or read glosses on, and the glosses were mistaken. Ross is, think about this. Ross is a translator of Aristotle and commentator on Aristotle, wrote his dissertation on Immanuel Kant, comes out with the right and the good. If you read, everybody only reads chapter 2 of it, but you could read the rest of it. He doesn't think that we just like have blind intuitions about. He thinks that we can pick out as prima facie should do this. And this continues on down to this, by the way, with Robert Cody, who's another very important person within the field of ethics, and who definitely doesn't think that we just like follow our gut or something like that. There are a lot of people who talk about intuitions in philosophy, but not ethical intuitionists. They are people who usually analytic philosophers love to talk about their intuitions, and then they they talk about whether they think other people use intuition or not, and that's a whole separate conversation. So I teach Ross in my classes, the prima facie duties. Actually, I teach Ross and I both, particularly in business ethics. I think it's a useful approach. I don't think it captures everything that we have to capture, but I think that it's quite good. Wise Coyote, how do you think one should handle racism, particularly one is subjected to some racism or verbal downs by white people? Well, I don't think there's a one single response for that. It really depends on the situation. In some cases, it could be good to like confront it and call it out. In other cases, it's probably not going to do much of anything, which isn't to say it's wrong then to call it out. It's just that if you're dealing with hardcore racists, you confronting them is probably not going to get them to change their mind. The pressure, a lot of people confronting them, that offers them to reconsider stuff. The other thing, I suppose, to keep in mind, you want to have a proportional response. This is where sometimes things are missing. There is some horrible racism going on at any given moment. Probably just within this city of Milwaukee, let alone our state of Wisconsin, further north and west, the more racist people get in general. So you can be guaranteed that there's some stuff going on, microaggressions and stuff like that. Sometimes they are what we claim them to be. Sometimes they're not. And I think so coming back to proportionality is quite important. Verbal put downs, that's more clear cut. I would say pushing back is important. It's not going to usually much in any given one situation, and it might actually bring you put a target on you as well. So, all right, Sean, have I read any novels by Robert Graves? I don't think so. Justin Marty, David Hume was literally wrong about everything. It's impossible to be literally wrong about everything. So your statement is literally false. It's very hyperbolic. There's actually a lot of things that Hume is quite right about. And I think we should, when we're considering philosophy, again, I just use that word proportionality. We always want to be proportionate in what we're criticizing. All right, Andrew, do you think without human suffering there'd be any philosophers? Kind of a point. There's always human suffering. Are you asking whether you think the origin of philosophy is suffering? I mean, philosophers have identified other origins of philosophy, going all the way back to Plato and Aristotle. Philosophy began wonder. Epictetus has said that philosophy began in the conflict between people's statements about things, trying to figure out which one's actually correct. So I suppose that could entail suffering, but I don't think that you have to say that philosophy is primarily motivated by human suffering. So, all right. Nausea, what's your advice for someone wanting to go into academia? Well, it's going to be a tough market, and if you are going to go to academia, because of the way the game is played, you want to go to a grad school, your final degree that's as high as you can. And high tier has nothing to do with merit whatsoever. It just has to social prestige, and it may be different by the time you're actually down the line going for a PhD. And then after you have that, you might still not find a job, or you might be bouncing around from one, contract to another. So it's life to live, and you probably want to figure out a plan B. There's nothing wrong with having something like that. But if you really want to go into academia, there's ways that you could. So, All right. Ironically started with phenomenology, but your commentary and analysis is really helpful. I'm glad to hear about it. Yeah, I've been able to do more of the half-hour Hegel lately, which is kind of nice. Isaac says, what should I do? Ever since my quest for knowledge and want to become a pastor, I've seemed to disappoint my parents. I've become an atheist. Recently got heavily interested in philosophy. I've been happier ever since, but they can't accept that fact. They keep trying to convert me and push ideas I find illogical and not coherent. And I have honest discussions, but they just speak over me. Well, there's not much you're going to be able to do in that case, and so you probably have to prepare for the long haul of, unfortunately, having people that you're close to in really fundamental disagreement over views with you. That sucks. But you can't change their mind. There's no magic wand that you can wave that will do that. It's up to you whether the anguish caused by all this conflict is to the point where you want to sort of like take off relationships with them or try to keep back at it. But yeah, so I mean, you might think about like, well, what do you find that you have in common with them, or what do you still love or like about them, and try to remind yourself about that. That could be helpful, but that's a tough one. I don't know that much that you can do about that. I mean, you could also up, if you have this as a possibility, you could bring this up with a third party and say, do you think you could kind of help out here? Like maybe another family member or a friend of the family. That might be useful. All right, Fizzy Week. Hegel's critical philosophy is contained science of logic, not the philosophy of right to success. Well, that's just wrong. So, there's nothing to discuss. I mean, books. So. Johan says, do the Stoics offer any advice on being motivated on a project when results are far away? What their own advice? They don't offer advice on that per se, I would say, but they do offer advice about how to mind yourself, about what you're doing long term. It's less about particular, like, say, work projects, and it's more about like bringing yourself back to yourself and reminding yourself philosophy is the art of life, and you want to live a happier life. So I guess you could connect your long-term project with that, and you could remind yourself that you're developing things fall under the virtue of courage or fortitude, like perseverance, like sticking with things. That might be helpful for you. All right. Justin says, which Socratic thinker I like the most according to their ideas? That's a tough one because we have so little of their texts, right? We have fragments of different people. We don't have like Heraclitus's book on nature. If we had that, maybe he'd be my favorite one. It's tough. That's a tough one. I don't know what to say. I mean, I enjoy reading around in Heraclitus. I have to be very careful about like blowing the fragments that we have into more than they are. Parmenides is really cool to think through, although I don't buy into his ideas at all. Those, I mean, it's like sort of like Plato. Those two would be my favorite. Plato, in later dialogues is talking about like bring those two together. But we just don't have enough of those thinkers. So, I mean, maybe if we had like Pythagoras' stuff, it would be interesting. but I don't know. All right, Colomos, how's my knee? It's same as always, you know. A lot of people, when they watched my video where I talked about tearing ligaments in my knee, they didn't pay enough attention and realize that I tore my ligaments back in 2013, you know, when I was living in New York, and that I've been dealing with it since. It's the same as always. I've strengthened the muscles around it as much as possible, you know, max that out basically, and be careful, you know, not to screw it up, but it's not the end of the world. Matter of fact, one of our most important players, the Packers, tore his ACL a couple days ago. Bakhtiari. Now he'll get a replacement because he's still a young guy, but you know, this is a pretty common thing to happen. A lot of people. I had students who actually were ACLs when I was teaching at Marist, athletes. So, all right. Gabriel says, do you read many sociology authors? Which would be your favorite? Now, if you're talking about people who just identify strictly as sociologists, no, not really. Most of them are doing quantitative analysis, you know. Same with poli-sci. Read too many of them, but there's a lot of overlap between sociology and philosophy because, you know, sociology out of philosophy, right? Auguste Comte coins the term. And so, you know, I've read a lot of the early sociologists, and they're, you know, doing work that is pretty philosophical. So I think they're pretty interesting. I don't read of contemporary sociology unless I need to for some sort of project. So. All right, Morgan, have you read any indigenous authors? What are your thoughts on reconciliation between indigenous and non-indigenous people? Yeah, I've read. I mean, I used to actually, by request, when I was teaching at the prison, because there was a significant Native American community there, actually to the point where they obtained permission to build the sweat lodge. I used to teach classes where we do seminars on Native American spirituality, and they had a significant library there that they had gathered. So I've read people, but it's not like a specialty of mine any more than Chinese philosophy is. What do I think of reconciliation effort between indigenous and non-indigenous people? I think they're great. And I think that reconciliation effort and you know, projects are great in general, but that one always to be realistic. You know, most people who are aggressors who benefited from something are gonna, they're much more willing to give like lip service or do token gestures, and they're not really all that invested in actual reconciliation, which is, you know, it's a big problem. Reconciliation is needed in part because of historical trauma, which is a real thing. You know, a lot of people wanted to deny it because they want to have like a blank slate so they can feel like everything that they're doing is perfectly fine. But, you know, that's often the case. There's only so much you can do depending on who the parties are with those sort of efforts, though. So, all right. Andrew, have you been impressed by any from Dostoevsky? And what is? Yeah, I find Dostoevsky very impressive. I think that he's a really interesting author, and I love how he has these characters who are expressing philosophy, right, and raising it in very interesting ways. Because they're never raising it by saying, well, you know, Hegel says, Kant says, or you know, this person here's always like, here's some ideas, and here's how I'm trying to make sense of the world using that. And then they have arguments with each other, and they live out the philosophies, or they fail to in certain ways. And I find really quite interesting. And then you've got all the other mix of, like, you know, human sexuality and what we do in life, and you know, all of these questions. And Dostoevsky himself doesn't want to see, you know, tell what his point of view is, and that Bakhtin is quite correct about Dostoevsky in that respect. So, all right. Let's go down. Into Dionysus, the disdain of thought that one starts with okay, I don't know what that means. Move on. Walter White asks, how consistent do you think William James' pragmatism is? Consistent with what? Consistent with itself? I'm not sure what consistency means there. Are you taking like a sort of a meting? Is pragmatism itself pragmatic? You know, that's a little bit tough to answer. All right, Isaac says, as I would hear your insight on biblical slavery, usually when I have a discussion on people, it's not true slavery or was because of cultural appropriation. I'm curious. I don't know what would be connected with cultural appropriation. Do you always justify what views do you hold? Is it an all omnipotent being immoral or evil because this? Or are you simply not able to judge moral superiority? I would say all those are wrong. I would say slavery has existed in basically every society that made it to an agrarian level. It was a constant of human existence. And I mean, you can even find like in the Numa Elish, right? Why are human beings created? To be slaves of the gods. So slavery or servitude, however you want to name it, has been around for a very long time. It would be weird for it not to be in ancient texts, right? Whether they're Hebrew, Greek, Latin, Chinese, pick whatever you want. And you know, are you saying like God should have, waved his hand and made everybody not a slave? There's also a discourse about like freeing captives and slaves in the Bible. I think it's a major theme, the Exodus, about that. So I don't see this as a really central issue. I mean, you can raise issues like Paul and Timothy. Should Paul have gone against the institution of slavery as such? That's a question than like the whole of ancient culture. What I think you can find, and not just in biblical literature, also like say in Seneca. Seneca has a lot of discussions about slavery, or Epictetus, who himself was a slave. There's different ways to understand slavery. There's a huge variety of how people are treated. Are there a lot of people rejecting the institution of slavery per se? There were some, very few. Aristotle actually talks about that in Polus Book 1. He says some people say that all slavery is unnatural, therefore against justice. But he doesn't know who they are, and you get the idea that they're like an extreme position in ancient culture. So what you see is a lot of emphasis on understanding the shared humanity with the slave, not treating them in a purely despotic manner. So I guess that would be my view on it. It's kind of a non-view, but I don't know what else to tell you. All right. Quinn says, hope you're doing well. Do you have any opinions or thought on the Enlightenment philosophers, particularly French? I'm reading Rousseau and was wondering who you think is valuable from period. So Rousseau's kind of a weirdo in that, right? He is in the Enlightenment, but also kind of critical of the Enlightenment by comparison, people like D'Alembert and Diderot and some of the other thinkers that fit into that time. Many of them are, by the way, influenced by Locke in the French thinkers. So I think they're interesting and they're well worth reading. I mean, if you want to understand how we got here today, like let's say you're a big McIntyre fan, right? I was just talking with a client about this yesterday, and the Enlightenment Project. If you want to understand what Enlightenment Project it is, you probably got to read some of these Enlightenment thinkers. Rousseau, though, like saying he's kind of a weird guy in this respect. He's for the Enlightenment. There's certain themes that he corresponds with, like being critical of political power, religious power, projecting out some better way some more rational way of living together. But he's also pessimistic and suspicious of how this is actually going to work by comparison to some of these other much more optimistic thinkers who are like, just get rid of the arbitrary political power and the priestcraft and superstition. Human rationality will be free. We'll have this society. We'll take care of everybody. Nobody's going to be hungry. Criminal justice will actually be coherent. Rousseau's kind of suspicious of that, isn't he? So, yeah, and Rousseau was also a guy who had a lot of psychological problems. I mean, he was a prick that he managed to get David Hume not to like him after a while, and that took a lot. And so, yeah, they're all well worth reading, I'd say. All right. Andrew asks, any chance of a video series, Dostoevsky's The Idiot and the Demons or Possessed? Different translations of that work. Yeah, I've been wanting to get to the Demons / the Possessed quite a while. Maybe sometime this year. The Idiot, probably not. Not unless somebody commissions me. I just don't see the book as having the philosophical depth. I actually, my favorite Dostoevsky work is The Pest. I like it better than I like the Bruce Karamazov or Notes from Underground or Crime and Punishment. I haven't read The Idiot for a while, so maybe I'm wrong about this, but I just didn't see as much philosophical meat to engage in there. But I could be wrong, All right. Derek Harris just watched the documentary about Hannah Arendt, Vita Activa. What's your thoughts on banality, preservation as a path to evil, and the prevailing American culture of pragmatism? I don't know that there is a prevailing American culture of pragmatism. I think pragmatism as a philosophy would say that most Americans are pretty not pragmatic. So I'm not sure what that means. I mean, if we want to talk about like consumerism or something like that, I would say that could be America. My thoughts on banality as a pathway to evil. I mean, when Arendt talks about the banality of evil, this is not a simple theory about the nature of all evil. It's not she thinks that that's the essence of evil is, and Kant had it wrong with radical evil. She's saying in some cases this is an aspect of evil that's often been left out. And, it wasn't just about following orders or scissors like that. When she's talking about Eichmann was a cliche-ridden person. She talks about him as unable to address other people or the world or what he did except by using cliches. And, are there a lot of Americans like that? Yeah, but there's a lot of like that everywhere at any time. I don't see that as uniquely American. So, yeah. All right. Louis Pez, what's your take on the fate laws of power? I mean, there's all sorts of silly works out there like that, all sorts of self-helpy or, how Machiavelli leads the way kind of things. I mean, if people are interested in that sort of thing, they could be spending their time reading philosophy rather than, reading stuff like that. But what are you going to do, right? That's what it typically is, and it's part of a genre that's bound for a very long time. There's going to be new iterations of it. Maxwell has a question here. How do I introduce the metaphysics of Christianity to my secular, progressive, leftist friends and family? Do you think the average secular person thinks about metaphysics much at all? I don't even know what the physics of Christianity is. So. I mean, there's actually a great book out there by Ethowen, I think, Christian metaphysics that I ran into when I was doing my work on Christian philosophies. There is no single metaphysics. I don't know where the term is coming from. It's probably from some secondary work or some particular author. It means their metaphysics that it has something to do with Christianity. So I don't know how you would introduce it to your secular progressive leftist friends. I would say that if you want to get your secular left progressive friends interested in Christianity, maybe what you do is you live a Christian life, and that's life following the Sermon on the Mount, and you show them through the kind of life and the things that you do and the things that you say and don't say, what Christianity has to offer to people. I mean, the thing with like Stoicism, right? If you want to get people interested in Stoicism, it's less effective to be like, this is going to change your life, man, or this is the true understanding of things. And it's more like, well, you live a certain way, and people are like, why are you so happy? Well, I've got this thing going on. It's changing things. That might be a way to go about it, I would say. Andrew, what do you think of Bukowski? Not a fan. I mean, I sort of did my obligatory reading of Bukowski in the 90s when people were introducing him to me, and I was like, well, this is a great piece for the kind of like scumbag barflies that I know and hang around with, but I don't see much here that's very, very interesting. He's sort of like, in some respects, Norman Mailer Redux. And I never found much all that interesting in him. I guess a lot of people do. But, all right, Kyle, would you consider doing a book review of George Orwell's 1984? I wouldn't do a review. I would consider doing core videos or something else. The book reviews that I do at Sadler's Honest Reviews are about more or less contemporary philosophy, self-help, leadership, all that sort of stuff, like how to improve your life kind of books. I don't know that George Orwell's 1984 fits into that all well. But yeah, I'd consider doing something on it. I mean, we'll fit it into the world of speculative fiction series sometime as well. Maybe we'll do a session on George Orwell, not this year because we already have all the things laid out. So, yeah. All right, Engir. I want the list of all philosophical questions. Who's here to define a philosophical position? Not even sure what that means, so I'm going to skip over that one. Let's see here. Just skipped a bit. R.T. Whitby, what are you, the philosopher of Maimonides? Interesting person to read. I'm not an expert on Maimonides. I've read some of his stuff. I don't draw on him very much, so I'm usually only going back to him when there's something that I need to check out. But a lot of people like him. Lalani, I read some of Leviathan. What else? Read by Thomas Hobbes. Read Leviathan again, and just book one and book two, because book three and book four are Hobbes' wild, crazy, totally irrelevant political theology that even Hobbes scholars, for the most part, don't bother with reading. But Leviathan is his best work. You may not know this, but Hobbes actually one of the sets of sections to Descartes' mentions. And that's worth checking out too. Hobbes and Descartes didn't get along too well. Hobbes also has another work that I really do recommend. I mean, you can also read all these other works that kind of feed into Leviathan, like the De Cive and all that. But he wrote another book called Behemoth, or The Long Parliament. And Leviathan and Behemoth are these biblical creatures, right? And so these are companion piece books. Behemoth tells you the story from Hobbes's point of view, somebody who lived through it, of how everything broke down in Britain to a civil war, and how the different people were maturing. And when you read that as a companion to Leviathan, there's parts of Leviathan where you're like, oh, that's what he's talking about. That's why he's so worried about divines, meaning theologians, preaching about this sort of thing. He wants the state to censure them or shut them down because this led to this and this. This is why he thinks the state has this absolute monopoly power. So Behemoth is really good book to check out. Tyson, in which style does Plato bring Heraclitus and Parmenides together? I always get these mixed up. It's one of the later ones. I think it's the Sophist, or it's not the Statesman, right? I think it's the Sophist in which he talks about that. Bizod, can you please say a few words about the legacy of Leo Strauss? You generally think about his work or ideas. Strauss is kind of second-rate thinker in my view. He certainly was charismatic. He has this like esoteric read things that I just don't buy into. Straussians, I've known quite a few of them. I don't find them particularly interesting, and their hero worship of Strauss, in the past has been a little bit off-putting. That said, sometimes he has interesting things to contribute. I've cited him before, like in my work on Hobbes. So I just, I see him as somebody who I want to spend a lot of time with in my remaining years. But yeah. John Sherlock, what's your opinion on Oswald Spengler and the decline of the West and philosophy of history in general? So philosophy of history in general, you got to be careful with it. A lot of it's pretty schlocky stuff, and I say that Spengler. It's been a long time since when I did I'm not impressed. People who think that he's the greatest almost invariably try to be poorly read and kind of kooky. They're really more attracted to some of the things in his message or what they got somebody else. Is he worth reading? Sure. Just as much Auguste Comte is worth reading, or Herbert Spencer is. Philosophy of history is tough to do because history is so damn complex. Anytime you're like, I figured out the direction history is going, pretty soon history will come around and show you wrong. So yeah, I don't know. I don't have a lot of views on the philosophy of history side. Paintree, what do you think of the philosopher Philip Mainlander? Never heard of him. So I don't know enough about him. It could be interesting. Yes, do you have any thoughts on Deleuze's interpretation that runs through his book and philosophy? It's been a long time since I've read. I actually present on that in grad school, and I don't think I've read it since. So I don't really remember too well what his views on Hegel were in that book. Neil, have you read Humor as a Response to Nihilism by John Marmiz? What are your thoughts on it? I've never heard of him or the book, but it sounds quite interesting. And the reason why I think it sounds interesting is that I very much am attracted to humor, and I think that humor is a good thing. And often all we can do is laugh. Now, there's ways of laughing that I think are not particularly helpful. We talk in comedy about punching down, like finding somebody just to make fun of who's weaker than us or in a worse off position than us. I don't think that's cool. But I think sometimes we do have to laugh at how screwed up things. I don't even think it necessarily has to be nihilism. But sometimes some kinds of nihilistic approaches or people, if we make fun of them or we laugh at them, we don't make them no longer nihilists, but we defang them. So that sounds like an interesting, perhaps promising point of view. All right, here's a picture question from Snow. What's my opinion on democracy? Do I think democratic nations are sometimes disadvantaged compared to autocratic nations? Sometimes they are, and sometimes they're not. I mean, it really depends on what we're talking about. If your goal is to know what people think, democracy works better than democracy. If your goal is to have a functioning economy, there aren't a hell of a lot of autocratic places that are doing all that great. Singapore often gets mentioned as like a good example of I forget exactly how there's a term that they use for it where it's democratic in some respects, but you got the autocrat who's on top. Most autocratic regimes historically have ended up missing many opportunities. But that could also be less about democracy as such and more about rule of law, or more about capitalist and other types of economic things. Autocratic regimes don't do capitalism very well. Usually winds up being way more crony capitalism than what we've got. I mean, here in the United States, we don't have a funk democracy in every respect. In many respects, we don't have many parts of the citizenry who are not adequately represented and who are targeted by instruments of state power, whether at the federal or at the local levels. We're certainly less democratic than we were when I was a kid. We've sort of slid backwards in many respects, but I don't know that there's a lot to point to as like really getting things right that way. All right, Matthew. Most of my reading has been broadly chronological. Therefore, I'll be running into Kant soon. Oh, good. Can you help with where to start? I'm pretty patient with my reading. Happy to spend time on text. Well, I mean, Kant wrote the Prolegomena. That's the read this first, right? So I would do that before jumping to the critiques. Likewise, the groundwork for the Metaphysics of Moral. That's a good starter text. I would actually read around before you jump into. I'm going to read the critiques. Read some of his various essays, like on perpetual peace, or some of these texts that you can get your hands on, where he's writing a more popular way, and then you can launch and you can do the critiques in their order. First critique of pure reason. Second critique of practical reason. Critique of judgment. That's a weird, wild book. And you don't have to feel like you have to totally understand all of those parts. This critique is way easier than the first or the third. I found. And then there's things like Religion Within the Limits of Reason, which is definitely worth reading, which turns out to be more and more about ethics than anything else. I mean, that's kind of the things is things are often misnamed. But that's what I would do. T. Miguel, have you read Critique of Dialectical Reason, Search for Method, Material, and Revolution, or any of Sartre's Marxist work? Yes, but it's been a long time ago, and I haven't read since, so there's not much to say about that. All right. Vasily says, greetings from Russia. I wanted to ask your opinion about Chinese philosophy, Asian philosophy in general. Have you read any? Was it rarely studied in the West? Yeah, I started reading Chinese philosophy back as an undergraduate, and I've taught classes on it from time to time, or incorporating. I will say the Chinese philosophical tradition, or we even expand East Asian, where China is sort of at the center. But we also include Korea, Japan, Vietnam. There's it's vast. There's so much there. It goes way back. There's so interesting movement study. I'm handicapped in that I don't read contemporary Chinese other than like about 200 characters from one studying it a while back, let alone classic Chinese. So I'm dependent on other people's translations in a way that I'm not, say, with like the Stoics, where I can go to the Greek or the Latin. So I'm always a little bit worried about whether I'm getting the stuff right, and I don't consider myself an expert on it. But I do think it's well studying, and I try to incorporate it into like my introduction philosophy classes when I can. Like this around with philosophy of human nature, we're going to be reading some Confucian Analects and to the Mensis, right? So I think it's well worth reading. Why is it rarely studied in the West? Most people are rarely studied in the West. Even West philosophers many of them are rarely studied in the West. I was surprised to find out that most of my colleagues, when they teach Descartes and then they teach the Meditations, they only teach Meditations 1 and 2. They don't teach the whole fucking book. And you're like, well, why then would you do that? Well, I just don't find the rest of it interesting, or we had to, we have to do in a short amount of time. I just don't know the rest of the. So it's part of a bigger problem, I think you could say, and we could also extend this to Indian philosophy, or to Islamic philosophy, or to other areas as well. Why aren't we teaching them? Well, we're usually just teaching a very, very narrow amount of stuff. And anytime that we bring something new in an academic way, we got something out. So we're always doing what we call triage, deciding who's in, who's out. And that makes it a bit tough. But that's a good question. All right, Lars is asking if you've come across any of William Reich's works, the one who wrote about order energy. Yeah, I read Reich like a long time ago, and that's some weird, wacky, wild stuff too, isn't it? So for those who don't know, William Reich was a psychoanalyst, forged his own direction, very different, developed his own sort of organization and approach. And there are Reichians out there today, but they're a very small group now. All right. Yakuis, how can I confirm the earth is a ball without utilizing a logical fallacy? I don't know, man. That's really not something I've really worried too much about. Maybe somebody else can help you out with that one. So, all right. I just skipped a bit. Let's see. Let me scroll back. There we go. People are saying like the idea of 94. A lot of people talking and forth about audio issues over which I don't have control. We've already addressed that. Minimus, have you read Lacan eventually? Yeah, I read a little Lacan. I was in the faculty seminar led by Alistair McIntyre on practical rationality back in 2005, where we considered Aristotelian Thomism and rational choice theory, and then Freud and Lacan. And I studied under somebody who was also a practiced psychoanalyst and did work on Lacan. So in grad school, I read quite a bit of Lacan. I also published a few things on Lacan there. So it's not as much as I'd like, but yeah, I know some Lacan. So, all right. Let's see here. Don asks, any tips on processing emotions in a healthy way? I often fall in the trap of suppressing or avoiding negative emotions. Yeah, so you start where you are. And this holds not just for Stoicism, but if you were going to take an Aristotelian approach, or look at it through Buddhist lens, whatever it's going to be, right? Also, Christian discourses on the emotions. You start out where you are, and that's probably screwed up, and that's probably with emotional out of whack and doing things that they're their best responses, and afterward feel upset about it. you've got to start where you are, and so it's repressing your emotions or trying to avoid circumstances where they might get probably not going to be helpful. I think you decide what you want to focus on. Do you want to focus on understanding why your emotions arise in the situations? There's practice you can do with that and insight that you can apply to that. Do you want to like figure out where your emotional responses are off base and what a better set of responses might be? Okay, there's practices for that as well, and you can start putting these things together. You do it with baby steps, and you do it with iteration, and you keep track of it over time. And you out to other people who have gotten further along the way as resources for that, and you keep reading as well. Fortunately for certain emotions, there's some very helpful books out there. Like Seneca's got a great book on anger, right? Do I do you have to buy into everything that he's saying? No, not necessarily, but you can use some of the insights. So that's what I would say you can do by way of advice. All right, DC Frank, do you think there's a problem with hubris and snobbery and academic philosophy? Do you think there's a lot of insight and wisdom lost as a result? There's a problem with hubris and snobbery in every single domain of human life, right? So why should academic philosophy be any different? Oh, because it's philosophy, right? No, I mean, philosophers are human beings subject to the same sort of psychological dynamics as everybody else. Sure, there's plenty of hubris and there's plenty of snobbery, and insights get lost. So what's the recourse? Try to find places where that's not the case. It's not like the case for everybody or everywhere or all the time. Find institutions, find people who are more genuine in that respect, and so them. All right, Fatal remains. Hey, Dr. Sadler, I read your paper on Lacan and the ethics of psychoanalysis. I'm still wondering how one discusses ethical psychoanalytic practice from malpractice, unethical actions in therapy. You probably saw how one discerns ethical psychoanalytic practice. Well, I mean, part of this is institutional, right? You're supposed to not just be winging it, going off on your own, doing things without any supervision, and you're supposed to engage with other psychotherapists. Now, I'm not a therapist, by the way. I'm a philosophical counsel, but the actual psychoanalytic institutes out there, they try to ensure that there's some kind of peer review. And can you rule out all malpractice, all say exploitation of patients or stuff like that? Probably not, right? You have to ask yourself a teleological question, though. What's the goal here? Is it to really cure the patient? It's not Lacanian psychoanalysis, although that is other kinds of psychoanalysis. Is it to allow them to attain a greater agency and a capacity to make sense of their life, not just to enable them for bad behaviors, but to allow them a certain reflectiveness on where they are and where they've been and how they're moving forward. Those are the sort of things that you ask. There is no hard and fast rule for that. There's no line where you can say, oh, there are some lines. Right? Sleeping with the patient, unethical. Just as much as, by the way, this is a bit of a rant. There's no times when a professor should sleep with a student. That's just stupid. There's a power differential there, and you can say, oh, what about this particular case? Wait until a student. Same thing with patients. You don't sleep with the patients, right? Why not? Well, because you're exploiting a situation in which there's a power imbalance, and there's probably a lot of transference going on, right? So there are some rules like that, but then you get to well, what about this? What about this? I say that in a lot of cases, is asking those sorts of questions is a sign that you probably should say, no, let's this over here. Yeah. All right. Let's see what else we got here, since we're getting to the end. Okay, so Aaron Lopez, I'm having a hard time understanding the concept of teleology. I'm wondering if you can explain the concept or point me to a resource. Teleology just ends and means. Things are directed towards ends, towards goals, purposes. There's nothing mysterious about this. Even asking your question has a teleology, right? You're asking it in order to get an answer. It's not anything. There's probably somebody who's like teleology, the principle. No, teleology is just referring us to things being directed to particular ends or goals or purposes. That's all it really means. All right. Alex asked, have I read Joseph Pieper or Max Picard? I've read some Pieper ways back. Never heard of Picard. So, what about the contemporary debate, Hegel versus Deleuze? I would say anybody wasting their time on that is probably, doing exactly that, wasting their time. Why would we have a debate versus Deleuze? Like, as if these are like the two thinker that capture everything. All right, low down. Lex asks a question here. Currently reading Being in Time. Do you think it's wise to keep reading at moments when I don't get what he is saying? Yes. And the first time that you read a text, you should just read it all the way through. Even if you don't understand it all the way, you're going to go back and reread it, right? So keep plowing through. Sometimes the answer to something that you're looking for, or later on down the line, turns out to be in a later chapter, and you're like, oh, that's what it was talking about. Early on, the beginning of Being in Time, Heidegger uses this terminology of ontic and ontological, and doesn't bother to clarify what the hell he's talking about. That can throw people for a loop, right? So that's a problem. But yeah, I would keep plowing away at it and just expect that you're going to have to reread, and that's okay. That's totally normal. That's the way it works in philosophy. By the way, I'm going to create some videos for my academic students, also for other people talking about these sort of things. I'm going to redo the how to read a philosophical text video that I did probably 8-9 years ago. Back with my beard. I don't think I had a beard back then, but if I did, it was the same color as my hair. So all right. Let's see here. Here's a question from Ram Da. Why understanding Stoicism, regularly practicing it efficiently, even after acknowledging it is hard or slippery? Is it due to lack of discipline or something else? So Stoicism, just other philosophies of life, is a complex system. And there's ideas, also networked ideas, and you have to internalize and make them part of who you are in order for those ideas to really be fully real to you exactly what's going on. That is a lot of work, right? That's a continual practice. You can't life hack Stoicism any more than you can life hack anything else that's worthing. You can do sort of superficial stuff. You can't make lasting changes without doing a continual iterative work. So again, it's normal that you're going to feel like things are kind of slipping out of hand or not entirely there, right? That's okay. Okay, that's normal. All right. Let's see here. Alex says you like Rilke. Admire Picard a great deal. I think Picard is indirectly related somehow to Per. Okay, a lot of people heard Rilke. Marcel actually wrote music for Rilke's poetry. We have so many hours in the day, so many days in the week, so many weeks in the year. Of who we're going to devote our attention to. Jonathan Manbell, do you think there's a good case for epistocracy, for example, as advocated by Jason Brennan over democracy? Well, we don't have democracy, like I said before, and I don't remember Brennan's proposals that well. It's a couple of years since I looked, but I don't remember thinking that that's definitely going to work better. I mean, John Stuart Mill advocated something sort of like that, where smart people would get more votes than dumber people. But how do you test that, right? It's going to be totally controversial. So yeah, that's it's kind of a non-starter. I mean, go ahead, propose epistocracy, and then watch both the right and the left turn on you in howl mobs. I would say. All right, here we go. Let's see here. See, have you heard of John Vervaeke? Yes, I've worked with John Vervaeke. So what? He's an interesting guy. He published in Stoicism Today. If things are in Stoicism Today, since I'm the editor, you can bet that I've seen it, right, and put it in there. Janet Roth, what's your opinion on Vladimir Nabokov and his works? Do I like him, dislike him? I've only read Lolita, and I read that in a world literature class back in college, and I was okay. I didn't find it great. I didn't find it terrible. I haven't read any other Nabokov, so I'll tell you kind of a funny thing. This will be a good ender. So when my wife and I got there, a long time ago. It's more than 10 years now. We've been married for 9 years now. She would ask me about all these contemporary authors. And eventually, I told her, "Listen, is it written after 1950?" And she said, "Yeah." And I said, "I probably have that, because I spend most of my time reading people from the past. And if I have read some 1950 onward, it's probably going to be a sci-fi or fantasy author or somebody like that. It's probably not going to be some cutting edge contemporary literature or anything like that. I don't move in those circles. I don't really care what the literati think we ought to read, and so I'm not well read in that respect. And I don't tend to be. That's a good thing to end on. Sorry that there's been sound issues. There's nothing I can do about that. Everything looks fine on my end. We'll see what happens next time. And thanks for questions and comments.